Good morning, folks. Here it is, Wednesday, June the 17th, and with me, sitting in the left chair, though he is not completely comfortable with that label, is William Marvel. He is a local columnist. He's the Tuesday guy in the local paper. I'm the Thursday guy. He's also a Civil War historian, and in that context, we would start off today's discussion and may dominate. And that is, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Tom McLaughlin, and I am a conservative politically, and this is left and right. So Bill, I've never been able to label Bill. I don't know where he doesn't fit neatly into any category on the political spectrum. I do. I'm pretty stereotypically conservative, but he's not. So I don't know where it's going to go should we get onto that spectrum. But just to sum up our last show, I asked Bill, do you see parallels between the political climate in 1860 and the political climate today? And then it was October 2018 that we had this discussion. He did see parallels. I asked if the likelihood of conflict, armed conflict happening, and he didn't see that as very likely at the time, given the geography, of 1860, and now it's more spread out. So that's where we were. And do you see things as getting more polarized now, Bill, since the almost 2 years since we spoke last?
Oh, certainly. And I guess I would revise your interpretation of our last conclusion insofar as to say that because of the geographical consolidation of politics, because it isn't separated geographically, it would be very inconvenient for an actual civil conflict to develop. It's not necessarily less likely. It would certainly be much more ferocious and dangerous and frightening as a result. In fact, most civil wars develop that way. It's neighbor against neighbor, not necessarily region against region. Our Civil War was unique, well, if not unique, unusual in that respect.
We did, I think, agree that the sides that are becoming more polarized would be on the political spectrum, left and right. Mm-hmm. That polarization, in my view, has accelerated and is accelerating weekly. Mm-hmm. And would you concur with that?
I would, and it often seems deliberate. It seems to be a concerted effort to create polarization, to basically eliminate the political middle. And I guess I would offer as an example of that the recent letters to the Conway Daily Sun that seem designed to convince people who aren't paying attention that you and I are alike politically. I mean, I used to be the Conway Daily Sun's liberal columnist. Not that I considered myself inherently liberal, but most issues of that day I took a position on that made me the darling of the left, especially during the Iraq War, for instance. I remember you and I were vociferously opposed in our opinions of that. You favored it, and I was dead against it. Yet, as issues change, so does my perception, at least, of what the proper course is. And because I don't follow an ideological path per se, I'm difficult to peg politically, as you say. And so where I'm hovering both sides of the center, extremists on either end don't like to see that. They like to see themselves, particularly on the left today, as alone defenders of righteousness, and anyone who disagrees in any manner is the enemy and has to be the absolute worst of the political population.
Yeah, I'm going to shut my phone off before it goes off. Yes, definitely. We are categorized together mostly because the left has consolidated and has become closed-minded to, I mean, just they hold, you say, you said high ground. They're right, they say. They care more about humanity and everything than anyone else does, and that's where they put themselves. As being a stereotypical conservative, I know that I am, and that the way, at least it has understood in the last 5 or 10 years, that certain issues would place me there. The Republican Party platform I tend to agree with almost entirely. But I don't think I conformed myself to agree with it. I think I just evolved on those particular issues to the point where, oh, well, I happen to match up with them. Not a conscious thing. That could change if the party should change. In our other conversations, Bill and I, he has indicated that he thinks he has not changed, but that the Democrat Party has changed, and or the spectrum, what most people understand the spectrum to be, left and right political spectrum, that has shifted entirely to the left, and left you where, okay, now vis-a-vis this, I guess I'm still in the same position, but now I'm defined by others as being, to the right.
Well, that's exactly right, really, because when I was considered a liberal, or at least when I was highly regarded by liberals, at that time the Republican Party took what I considered an extreme view. They seemed to represent the closed-minded, narrow-minded element, intolerant of opposite opinion. And I abhorred that as much then as I do now, the presumption of a righteousness on the left. And as the spectrum has stretched to the left, that's left me, my more centrist position seem farther to the right.
Yeah, I perceive that the same way, that the left shifted. Now, when I've said it many times, I was born a Boston Irish Catholic Democrat, and I was born in 1951, but became politically aware that in the 60s, and it was highly influenced by my parents, who were politically active, and pretty much the Democrat Party. There was a whole spectrum of left and right within the Democrat Party at the time. That is no longer true. That I remember when Ocasio-Cortez was elected to Congress, and it was in 2018. That's shortly after we did the show in November 2018. And I remember thinking, holy smokes, how did a person with these positions ever get elected? But then the chairman of the party, the DNC, Thomas.
Perez?
I think so, Perez, and also Keith, somebody. They were co-chairs. They were neck and neck running for it. He's a Muslim from Minnesota.
Ellison?
Yes, Keith Ellison.
Yeah, the fellow who would be prosecuting the Minnesota police officers.
Correct. He's the AG in Minnesota. And AOC was like Perez said, AOC is the future of the Democrat Party. And I thought, whoa, how could the chairman of the DNC say something like that? Well, it's turned out to be true. I mean, it's becoming true.
I'm afraid that's true, and that's That's why a couple of weeks ago I suggested in an editorial that the best thing Joe Biden could do for the country, considering his history as a relatively mainstream liberal Democrat, is to choose a more conservative running mate, as Lincoln did in the middle of the Civil War. He chose someone from the opposite party. I think that not only would assure what already is a likely election for him, but it would also tend to cement the nation more politically. Whereas if he
At least retard the polarization.
Yes, and it would do. Whereas if he did the opposite, if he chooses a liberal, now that he's committed himself to choosing a woman, if he chose, say, Kamala Harris, that's going to divide the country even further. That's going to alienate more people in the center. You're again going to have essentially a minority president. Whereas if he chose someone, if he chose Nikki Haley, let's say, that would be an indication that he's trying to unite the country. But probably the Democratic Party is more interested in the Democratic Party than in the country. I'm not sure that's any longer true about the Republicans. As a minority party, I obviously they want to be a majority party, but I don't think they want to eliminate the opposition. I think they are interested in the nation as a whole, if only because it's in their interests to feel that way. But I don't see a good outcome from this election either way.
I'm afraid for the Wednesday morning after election, no matter which way it goes. But especially if Trump is reelected, I'm afraid of civil strife. If it doesn't happen before the election, and I'm afraid for this summer as well.
Well, civil strife is basically what we had from the outset once Trump was elected. I remember coming back from a research trip the night of the election. I was in Washington driving back, and I stopped in the first rest area in Connecticut to take a nap around 10 o'clock maybe, and crawled in the back of my van and woke up about 3 o'clock and started back down the road, and I heard that it looked like Hillary had lost, and I thought, aha! And then I thought, uh-oh. Because I wasn't a Trump supporter either. And from that point forward, we were on the cusp of violence, and we saw violence the day of the inauguration. The black-clad, masked liberal equivalent of Mussolini's black shirts were out on the streets in Washington, smashing windows and intimidating people, and
with women wearing pussy hats alongside them.
Yes, but I was more taken by a tramp like Madonna complaining that Trump treats women like tramps. I mean, I was more sympathetic to the women in the hats.
Yeah, it has. I had forgotten about that. And it was shortly after that a guy opened fire on a softball game targeting Republicans, and hit one, almost knocked off the, what is he, he's the majority whip, I think,
I've
at the time.
I've forgotten his name, shot him in the leg.
Steve Scalise in the hip.
That's right, yeah.
Almost killed him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's still crippled. And so, and he was a Bernie supporter.
Yeah.
But
so was I, originally.
Did the media make anything of that? No, it didn't. It played that down. That is, mainstream media, as an outbreak of left-wing Democrats using violence against their opposition.
Well, I've noticed that issues like that are treated differently by every news source, every outlet, and almost every issue is treated politically, whether it's a crime or the coronavirus, and where you might not see the coverage of that particular event from liberal outlets, I would. There are other things that I wouldn't see if I looked at conservative outlets. There are two newspapers in Washington that I often read when I go there: Politico and The Hill. It didn't take long to figure out that Politico is the liberal interpretation of the previous day's events, and The Hill is the conservative interpretation. I don't know if it's the way things are going or the way I've come to interpret things, but The Hill...
I have a similar interpretation.
But The Hill seems to be the more reasonable, the more balanced. Politico seems to be the less reasonable and less balanced. I won't say it's unbalanced, but it almost exclusively takes a liberal view of any topic.
I don't think it started that way, though. I mean, it started left of center, but it's gotten increasingly left of center.
Which? Politico?
Politico.
I only started reading them the last 3 years, I guess, and I haven't been to Washington recently since last year. So, and I try not to spend a lot of time online looking at news. Sometimes I fail in that effort, but I have a lot of things to do.
You have a pretty disciplined work schedule and book.
Yeah, and I enjoy it. I mean, it doesn't really take discipline. It's hard to keep myself away from it.
Yeah. So now you're at work on your 19th?
I'm at work on the 20th book. I'm proofreading the copy-edited version of my 19th book, a biography of a New Hampshire native who became a Union general and ended up being screwed by the radical Republicans in the Lincoln administration. But I'm trying to figure out exactly what my 20th book will be. I thought I would look at Democratic opposition to the Lincoln administration. That hasn't been handled a lot, but somehow I've gravitated into the early months of the conflict, even before hostilities began. And for the last 2 or 3 months, I've been working on reading different books about the start of the war, how it came about, and it's a little startling to realize how close it is to today, because it was an election that no one would accept that started the conflict. You know, you had a four-way race for president, and although Lincoln got less than 40% of the vote, thanks to the Electoral College that everyone now hates, he was elected president. Otherwise, it would have gone to the House of Representatives, and who knows what would have happened there. But the other 3 tickets that were running all included slaveholders. So it was that vote was split 3 ways, and more than 60% of what would have been the conservative vote was split enough that the I wouldn't call it liberal, but the less conservative plurality succeeded. And the southern states, in many cases, had already their legislators and some of their principal congressional spokesmen had already declared that if Lincoln were elected, they would secede. And so they kind of had themselves backed into a corner, besides which I think that was their last, they knew that was their last opportunity to protect their slave institutions.
You characterized the Democrat opposition to Lincoln as conservative, and Am I correct in
Yes,
interpreting that?
yes.
And that the brand new Republican Party under which Lincoln ran was liberal.
Moderate to liberal.
Okay.
It was an agglomeration of dead parties and politicians who had felt themselves cast adrift by those parties. There were people like Lincoln, who was an old line Whig, a Henry Clay Whig, really. You had apostate Democrats who were opposed to slavery, like Salmon P. Chase. Seward was an old Whig, William Seward, Lincoln's Secretary of State. And they ranged from conservative, which most people thought Lincoln was, to wildly liberal by the measure of the day, like Wendell Phillips and William Lloyd Garrison, the raging abolitionists of Massachusetts, who were really not that concerned about the secession of the southern states. They were so adamant that they not share in the responsibility, the national responsibility for slavery, that they were willing to let the southern states go. But then you had people like Lincoln and Browning. I've forgotten his first name, but Senator Browning from Illinois, who took Stephen Douglas's place when he died in the Senate. He was very conservative. He was an old friend of Lincoln's. And they drifted more to the left as the needs of the war and the need to cement support for the war forced them to or led them to.
It occurs to me we didn't start the show with question number 1.
Oh, okay.
Maybe we'll take a little break and do that. It's a short one. Should President Trump address the nation in light of the recent protests and acts of vandalism resulting from the death of George Floyd? Should Trump address the nation?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
No.
We'll both answer
Yes.
it. But
No.
go ahead. Okay, because?
Because he's so damnably inarticulate that he would only make it worse. It would be better off if you just shut the hell up.
If he tried to do it off the cuff, I would agree with you. His last speech, which was much criticized, and when he was in the Rose Garden, it was only a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago.
I don't know what.
He was in the Rose Garden. He spoke from a teleprompter. He stuck to the script and didn't take questions afterward. And then he walked across Lafayette Park. And went and held the Bible up in front of the Episcopal Church, for which he was much criticized. But that was a scripted. He may have had input into what went into the speech, but I assume his speechwriters gave it. And it basically was, if the states don't stop this destruction, these riots, I will, and I'll use the military. And that was the thrust. I mean, there wasn't much more than that. I having just the day before, this Lafayette Park group became unruly and wounded 50 Secret Service agents with bricks and other flying objects, and then he went into the bunker. The Secret Service made him go into the bunker in the White House, and so that's what prompted him to give this speech, and say, we're going to clear out Lafayette Park, and I'm going to walk across it to show that this is we have reestablished order here in our immediate environs. So I thought it was a good move. Mainstream media didn't think it was a good move. Said it was just a photo op and da 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 da. And it's the way media now. I'm not sure. Things are changing so quickly that I can't say, here is my position now on what's going on, because I'm not confident in my position, and I'll start to, figure, okay, here's how I feel about this event, and then another event takes place, and then it seems to get worse, and I'm thinking, well, I guess I must have misjudged this because I didn't see that coming, and now, I feel fluid as I watch events, and I'm always trying to form a hypothesis to explain and make sense of what I'm seeing, and then that becomes my opinion. But I haven't been able to do that. I can't hang on. I'm hanging on and being carried along as I'm trying to understand events. That's. I don't know if you understand that, but that's how I'm
do.
feeling lately.
I have felt the same sense of surprise and alarm with each new development. And in each case, what it tends to do for me is make me lament all the more the abysmal ignorance of history in our society, thanks largely to the public education system that prevents people from realizing how quickly a society can collapse. I mean, in the Civil War itself, just in that one context, the greatest surprise in the North was how quickly the Confederacy just collapsed.
At the end of the war.
Yes. In February and March of 1865, although it was known internally how weakened the South was militarily and how destitute it was financially, that wasn't clear in the North, and order was still maintained as long as there was an army, as long as there was a government, and then basically in 3 days everything fell apart. All it took was one military defeat, one retreat by the government, and it was gone.
Civilization is but a thin veneer over the seething mass of humanity. And I don't know who said it, but
sounds like Matthew Arnold.
I don't know who that is.
A poet, Dover Beach.
Oh, could be. I don't know. But it just it's in my brain and it resonates, and it's called forth a lot lately. And you suspected, you said, like this, there's a local barrage of letters to the editor, lumping the two of us together as ideologically similar. And yeah, and again this morning there was one. So you said it was a concerted effort, or you suspected it was.
It looks like a concerted effort. I don't pretend to know. Unlike the clairvoyant cognoscenti of the millennial mob, I don't know.
Interesting phrase.
I can only judge by what I see and
you suspect, perhaps.
And it just seems to me that the people who are involved, oddly enough, one of the people who wrote a letter a week or two ago was a woman I have met only once. My wife is more familiar with her than I am. I would call her a flaming liberal. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Many of my best friends are flaming liberals, especially female friends. But this woman managed to convince me in a conversation that didn't last more than 90 seconds that she was really an intolerant bigot. The subject was that this was at a Kennett High School reunion. Her husband was a Kennett High School graduate from before me. And so I was introduced to her, and we immediately, I don't know how, politics came up. And it must have been it was before the Supreme Court decision on gay marriage, because it was still an issue that was being hashed out state by state. And I made some comment about how there seemed to be plenty of people who were opposed to gay marriage. And she said, in as sneering a tone as I've ever heard from anyone, just Christians. And, you know, I'm an atheist who makes fun of my fundamentalist in-laws all the time. But it was clear to me that this woman, who actually goes to a church, but a UU church, was so disrespectful of religious belief, and it's
hostile to it.
Yes. And now she and others seem dead set on denying me any intellectual agency. I'm not able to think for myself. I have to be over there with you because that makes them look better. It makes it tends to lessen the differentiation between center and left. It tends to mute how far the left has gone. And most of the people who have been writing that way have been doing it for quite some time, and they seem intent on silencing you and me because now I'm over there with you, they think.
Regarding, okay, either it is or it isn't, and we may never know, a concerted effort locally. But let's take the national scene. Trump looked in January and into February, it looked like a shoo-in for re-election. Strong economy, a lot of anti-Trump sentiment, of course, but weak candidate on the other side, a slew of them anyway. So that then on comes the virus. And now the virus, I don't think, the virus happened. However, I don't know whether the Chinese sprung it on us intentionally, I kind of doubt, but yeah, it's a possibility. So there it is, the virus. But then, where the CDC and the NIH all decided, well, we advised the president to shut down the economy so as to be able to fight this virus. That was brand new. Now what did that entail? That entailed hugely increased government power over the day-to-day lives of every one of us, which is what the left has always wanted, I believe, most of the people on the left, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And they said, whoa, look at what's look what the government has been able to do. And AOC and her ilk had sprung the Green New Deal on us less than 2 years ago. That was January of 2019, that the Green New Deal, and people, and even Nancy Pelosi said, oh, that's ridiculous. That was just, we would never go there. Well, now the Green New Deal ideas have become mainstream within the Democrat Party in such a short time. Mm-hmm. And what would they involve if they were implemented? They would involve a highly increased control by central government, federal government, over almost not every aspect of our lives as the reaction to COVID has turned out, but still, over what kind of fuel we use, our lifestyles, our jet travel, our it was far-ranging. I mean, it would have involved an enormously increased central government. And so I think they were, the real lefties, the Bernie Sanders types and others, AOC, thought, oh, good, this is really possible. It could, this is serendipitous that this virus has turned out like this. And then along came George Floyd and his death, and an eruption of violence like 68 and 92 and so forth. And then, can we get out in front of this parade? And Antifa, these black-clad people that you referred to earlier on Inauguration Day, Trump's Inauguration Day, seem to have gotten out in front of this, and and let's bring the parade over here toward physical destruction and rioting and arson and so forth. Now that's how I'm seeing it. Now again, like my understanding of events is fluid as the events themselves are fluid. So I'm not saying this is my position, but these are my suspicions, and I'm looking for evidence that will support this. I'm not there yet, but I'm suspecting that this is being a concerted effort. The riots are by the left.
Well, let me break that into two subjects. First of all, I would say that my former fraternity with the left was based at least partly on a desire to protect the individual from government intrusion. And now that seems to have been abandoned because of the reasons you explain. The virus issue, I think, is the reaction to it is almost predictable, given the last few decades of proliferation of the idea that if it saves one life, it'll all be worth it. That's baloney. If that were true, we wouldn't have fought any wars, would we? And then the lockdown was a result of politicians not wanting to look bad, not wanting to look irresponsible, not wanting to take responsibility for interpreting medical advice in conjunction with economic and social considerations. And the lockdown that came as a result, as I wrote early in April, created a class of people who are confined at home with no money, nowhere to go, rage building up. And I asked in that column in early April, are we willing to apply the force necessary to quell the riots that inevitably erupt when this population finally explodes? And the answer obviously is no, we're not. The George Floyd incident, I understand the reaction to it. I mean, I remember writing a column in which I was outraged about the result of the Rodney King trial in 1992. I found recently columns.
You mean the cops let off?
Yeah, the cops were let off,
Yeah.
and it just seemed to me that it was a travesty.
In case there might be people who don't know
right.
Rodney
Okay.
King. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, he was this black guy was stopped for
1992.
After a high-speed chase might have happened in '91. The trial, I think, was '92
Okay,
at least.
all right.
Cops beat him for a minute and a half while he rolled around trying to avoid the blows, and they used his motions as an indication that he was resisting.
And it clearly wasn't. Anyone who watched it
and
come to that conclusion.
finally one cop came in and waved all the others off, and he submitted. But by that time he had a broken leg. They beat the hell out of him.
Yeah.
And it was clearly excessive
6 or 7
force.
cops, I think.
At least.
Yeah.
And I also found columns recently from 2010 and 2012 where I was railing against militarized police, against SWAT team raids that often were bungled.
I'm going to interrupt you. And the trial was, the cops were charged with excessive force,
excessive force, assault,
and they were exonerated.
Well, at least in the first trial, they were then subjected to federal charges.
Okay, I forgot that.
And they were, some of them at least,
and
were
that
convicted.
precipitated riots.
Not that, but the first trial, the first outcome when they were acquitted.
That's what we were comparing.
Yes.
This recent George Floyd.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Now, if you can remember the thread where I interrupted you.
Well, I was getting to my own columns criticizing police excess.
Okay.
And in those columns, I didn't specify the race of the victims. I mean, some were black, one was Hispanic, I remember, some were white. Black Lives Matter took off after the Michael Brown
Yes.
case, which I think was a badly flawed case just
Yes.
to make a martyr of. And I think, frankly, that organization and its activities have actually slowed, impeded the demilitarization of police, and have prevented a greater sympathy for the argument that police shouldn't use excess force, because it looks as though the only people who are going to suffer from it are black. In fact, more white people are killed by police than black, simply because there are more of them. And even though black people suffer that disproportionately, there may be other reasons than racism for that, at least racism on the part of the officer himself. Whereas if everyone realizes that anyone could become subject to this, then the support for pacifying the police, basically, would be more widespread. And if blacks are disproportionately suffering from it, they would disproportionately benefit from that activity. So I'm not a fan of Black Lives Matter. In fact, when I was still a Bernie Sanders supporter, when he confronted a Black Lives Matter advocate saying all lives matter.
I remember that.
Now you can't say that because that's a sign of racism.
Well, ostensibly, yes. I will still say that in any forum, regardless of how it's taken. And it's, yes, Michael Brown never put his hands up, never said, don't shoot, never, I mean, it was completely false reporting, and during and even after Attorney General, what's his name, under the Obama administration?
Eric Holder.
Eric Holder, you know, his team basically said, no, that never happened, and the cop was justified in shooting Michael Brown, and that he wasn't a gentle giant, and he was trying to get the cop's gun away from him, and the cop, you know, was in self-defense, shot Michael Brown. Yeah. And that the testimony that he had his hands up and don't shoot was false. They were his minions that had recently robbed a convenience store and bullied this little Asian guy there, and so but the original version that the media presented, that he was a victim, that he was unarmed and shot by a racist cop, that was the birth of Black Lives Matter, and it was sickening to me that occurred, you know, based on that incident.
The one thing I would say about the Brown incident is that he wasn't shot, I don't think, by a racist cop. He was shot by a cop who was afraid.
Yes.
I mean, he was 6'4", weighed 250 pounds. This cop was about 150 pounds.
Yes.
And in each of these incidents, Rodney King, George Floyd, Michael Brown, they all involved very big men. George Floyd was 6'6". And I think the police were afraid. And what we've gotten away from is the idea that, yes, a cop is going to be in a dangerous situation. He probably should be afraid, but should he react to save himself first? I mean, maybe Michael Brown wouldn't have been shot if the cop had had a taser, say. I don't know. I don't want to put myself in a position of a police officer, because, I mean, it's such a difficult position in the first place. And my reaction, if someone twice my size attacks me, I'm going to shoot him. But I'm not a cop. I didn't sign up for that.
Yeah.
Police did.
Yeah.
And that's where I think there's room for training to, in other aspects of what's the words? Not subduction, but subduing suspects who are resisting violently. The fear of guns has prompted so many shootings. that one fellow, Castile in Minnesota, he simply told the officer he had a gun, and the cop said, "Don't go for it, don't go for it." And the guy was reaching for his license to carry. And he just backed up and shot him because he was so afraid that the guy had a gun.
Yeah, whenever I'm stopped in traffic for speeding or something like that, and I remember seeing, you know, the cop would come up and not stand at my window, but stand well back.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I asked him, "Why are you standing back there? I can't see you." And they explained,
Yeah.
you know, and okay, I get it. And they got a bulletproof vest and so forth, and it's a rural Maine.
Yeah.
And it's
well, that's where it could happen. That's where you could get away with it, maybe.
Get away with
Shooting a cop. I mean, if he didn't radio your license in first, I mean, out in the middle of nowhere, that's where murders.
They're always in danger. These
are
cops
never.
are. There are in the city,
Yeah.
in the country. They are. I would not want to be one. I flirted with the idea when I was about 19 of maybe, you know, do I want to go into this field? I'm so glad I didn't. I'm really glad I didn't. And I see what they have to put up with. It's and the pay stinks. It's
I don't know about that.
Well, from Oxford County Sheriff's Department, I can tell you the pay is pretty terrible, worse than teachers, and and they're not paid very well in Oxford County. They're paid too well in other places, but not there. And anyway, it's a thankless job, at least there. But they could retire in 20 years, you know, like a military guy could, because of the stress of the situation. Right. That's an advantage, but still 20 years, you know, of domestic violence calls and traffic stops and who knows what.
Well,
you know.
Remember that Boston cop who was shot in the, was it the Weather Underground robbery in '73? He was near retirement, and they killed him on the sidewalk.
Was that Bill Ayers involved in that? And
I don't know.
He burned
I don't
Dorn know. And they were way lefties. The Weather Underground.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. It's.
All right.
Should we get to our other question? I don't know what our time limit is here.
Let's do that. Another short one, one line. Who do you think would be the most effective person Joe Biden could choose as his running mate?
I think I've already answered that. And I think I'll stick with it. It was kind of a spur-of-the-moment suggestion, but I think I would stick with it. Nikki Haley.
When you were talking, I'd be surprised if Nikki Haley, I would vote for president.
That's exactly what I'm getting at. I mean,
he
would draw off so many independents who have leaned toward Trump out of desperation that he would win by 75, 80% of the vote.
Nikki Haley has indicated her support for Donald Trump, and she's been asked, you know, when she left her job as UN ambassador.
Okay, now I'll have to reconsider.
And she, and she, that woman impresses me, has all along impressed me. And I would see her as a potential Margaret Thatcher, who I've always admired. I mean, if I think of women, okay, we don't agree on that, but as facial expressions, I could detect that. I've always admired her, and I would thought if we had someone like her, like a Jean Kirkpatrick, was kind of like her. Okay, another former UN ambassador. Those women, I didn't like Jean Kirkpatrick at the time because I was a lefty then. But now, in hindsight, I look back at her and I say, oh, yeah. Now, someone who was a Republican, a black woman, who has come out in opposition to Donald Trump, Condoleezza Rice.
Yes. Now, I would have been hostile to her because of the Bush association, but quite frankly, with the leftward drift or leftward lunge of the Democrats, Bush doesn't look nearly as bad as he used to. I mean, he's had moments of actual presidential behavior.
It's hard to support Donald Trump. I've never voted, I don't think, not lately anyway, not in the last couple of decades, for an individual because of the individual.
Mm-hmm.
I have voted for the platform that individual espouses.
Yeah.
It's always the issues to me. And Donald Trump as a man has never appealed to me, has repulsed me. Ever since I was reading Doonesbury columns from long ago, and any public appearances that he made. I voted for him very reluctantly, but I did. But I voted for him because of his platform, because of the things that he said he was going to do, most of which he's done, which I support, and the biggest issue being the abortion issue, and who he's appointed to the courts, even though Neil Gorsuch has recently, seemed to
recanted, apparently.
Evidently, and Roberts the same way.
Yeah.
He didn't appoint Roberts, but yeah, it's those issues, and illegal immigration as well on the border, which he hasn't really been successful at stopping, but has tried to.
Yeah.
And so, but trade issues and so forth. I have, and beefing up the military. I'm glad he has done those things, and I would vote for him again because of those issues, not because of who he is. But he has a proven record now. And what would Joe Biden propose? I mean, he is a stereotypically left, far left Democrat in his positions. I agree with you when you say that his history as Delaware senator and was, not that, but he's gone. I don't think I agree with him on anything, and so I couldn't possibly vote for him, even if Condoleezza Rice were his running mate. But and if he chose somebody like a Kamala Harris or the Michigan governor, what's her name? And,
I can't remember.
And this
who
woman
seems to
in
be
Georgia,
pandering for the job.
Yes, and I would be praying for Joe Biden to stay healthy if he were elected, so that these women would not take over. And I don't know how it's going to be, but it's I'm just prepared to be dismayed.
Yeah.
That's all.
Well, I think you will be satisfied in that expectation either way.
If you see a signal, let me know.
I haven't been.
Okay.
I've been listening for something, but we started so late. I don't remember when we started.
I don't either.
Well, I didn't vote for Trump. I voted for the pothead, whose name I've forgotten, and certainly not because he was a pothead, because he was
New
running.
Mexico governor, former one.
Right, he was Johnson. He was running with William Weld, whom I voted for in the primary this time. I chose a Republican ballot. Being an independent, I can. And I don't, frankly, know what I will do in the general without a third party to vote for, because if Joe Biden chooses anyone to the left of him, certainly not going to vote for that. I can't see myself bearing the burden of having voted for Donald Trump ever, but as I've said, the Republican Party seems to have the only people left whose judgments are based on reason at all. I don't share your views on abortion. Doesn't frankly bother me, but I will tell you that given the effort to create polarization in New Hampshire and to basically legalize infanticide as abortion and at the same time outlaw the ownership of guns, which is obviously the ultimate goal, to very much restrict even the ownership of guns.
Yeah.
Why should I support anyone who supports the right of women to get an abortion if those same people are going to take away my right to own a gun? I'm not going to do it. If I have to vote for the anti-abortion candidate to save the gun in my nightstand or my glove compartment, or my back pocket,
you would do so.
I would do so.
Yeah, yeah. There are people who, very big Second Amendment people, they tend to be on the right, but not all. And I know some who are not active politically, but do watch what's going on and are afraid of an unraveling, such as we alluded to earlier, and believe that, I find comfort in believing that I have an arsenal here, I have lots of ammunition, and I may need to use it just to defend my individual liberty or my property if the you-know-what hits the fan, as it looks like it is, is happening. If it's certain neighborhoods in certain cities around the country, it already has. And what would they do? And that's where I see violence breaking out, if it should happen, and it could happen soon. Could happen soon. I mean, we have the long, hot summer.
In places, it has happened.
Yes, it has.
In fact, I just this morning I saw a video clip from the Caliphate in Seattle, and a bunch of young people broke down the fence to this fellow's business, car business, and his son pulled out a gun to try to defend them. No shots ultimately were fired, but they destroyed his fence. I don't know what they were after. They didn't take anything. There seemed to be some interveners from the Caliphate who were keeping people, trying to keep people out of the guy's business. They seem to be attempting self-governance in much the way a lot of Northerners wanted to let the the seceded states stew in their own juices until they asked to come back into the country.
I probably would have had that position.
That seems to be what's happening in Seattle. I kind of would be interested to see what that looks like in 3 or 4 months. Of course, with the city of Seattle hauling their sewage away and their trash, and people bringing them in food all the time, there isn't much opportunity for legitimate self-governance, but they can at least play the role for a little while and pretend.
It's ridiculous. There were threats in Memphis that left-wing groups were going to take over some of that city. That hasn't manifested, I don't think. So if it should spread, if it should widen these zones, I might start to be concerned. But in the meantime, to go in, as Trump has suggested, to go in and take it back, I don't think is the right approach.
There's a constitutional problem there, and James Buchanan faced that problem in 1860 and 61 when the southern states seceded. His former Attorney General and later Secretary of State, Jeremiah Black, told him, his advice was, the United States doesn't have the authority to make war on a state, but it can defend federal property. So, and if there's no one in that state to call for, if there's no one in that state to call for federal aid, you can't offer it, except to defend federal property.
And the governor of Washington said that. No, it wasn't. The governor of Illinois said that when asked, and said, well, he can invoke this power, this act,
the Insurrection Act.
Insurrection Act, but I have to request them to come in, and he can't come in on
That's
his
for
own.
Civil, but if they attack a federal facility, it's the same as an embassy in a foreign country. You can defend that embassy with whatever force it takes.
I see.
And I think, frankly, you should have the carrot and the stick. The reason secession succeeded was weak and cowardly politicians at the state and local level, and to some degree at the federal level.
So as long as they abide by the Constitution, whoever, the president or some other person to replace him, you would support this?
I think you have to defend public property. We all paid for that. It's ours too.
Okay. Well, folks, we're out of time, and it went the way it went, and we did stick onto the script of, you know, yeah, things are getting worse out there, folks, and we hope, and violence is already broken. I hope it doesn't spread, and maybe we can come back after some time period and revisit this subject. I hope you agree with that.
Yes, and I hope we can do it with a little more optimistic perspective.
I hope so. Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome.